Welcome to today's show, and with me I've got a very special guest, Peter Hoyer. Peter is I don't want to call him retired, but he looks retired.
Partly.
Partly retired. Peter started working in the liquor industry when? Soon after you were born.
Pretty much, I would say.
But interesting for me is that Peter's dad was in the business as well. He started, for example, Argyle Liquors, which is now the famous Liberty Liquors in Durban.
That's correct. It was Montana Cellars at the time.
Montana Cellars. I remember that on the invoice it always said Montana Cellars when we delivered there in the old days.
Yeah.
But maybe start with your father. How did he end up in the business?
Well, we can start with my father, but of some point of interest, if we go back a bit earlier than that, my grandfather was part of the original Snell setup in Durban, right back in the day. And I don't know much of that history, save to say that he at one point was a director of the original Snell.
Okay.
And
was it before the Hoopers were involved?
Yes,
or have
I think it was before the Hoopers were involved. I never knew him because he sadly passed away when I was about 3 years old, so I didn't know any of the history beyond that. But my father then, as far as I remember, was always in the industry.
Okay.
Through the days of the original E.K. Green, Cellar Master, found his way into Stellenbosch Farmers Wineries.
Okay.
And was quite instrumental in launching Mainstay in the local market in Durban.
Okay.
And I still remember some of the stories he used to tell us about how they used to get the brand into the market.
Yeah.
But specifically, they were targeting the Indian market at that stage. So they would go into the hotels down. If you remember the old Butterworth Hotel and those kind of places in Durban, and they would do their work there and pour the brand and just try and get it out there. At that stage, Cane wasn't really a recognized brand. I think in Mainstay they saw that they had a high-profile brand that they wanted to launch, and of course we all know how successful that was.
Yeah.
But it wasn't an easy road, as far as I understand.
Was there any other cane on the market at the time, or branded, or how did it work?
Not that I recall. I think Smirnoff was just making its way there at that time, and there might have been some other cheaper brands that were available, probably no-name brands, if you want to call it that. But I think in Mainstay they specifically were targeting a certain market and a certain price point and a certain image of the brand.
Okay. And
so he spent a lot of time on that project. Once he left Stellenbosch Farmers Wineries, he bought the Montana Cellars store on Argyle Road from the Koenigs. Gerard Koenig and his father, who owned it at the time.
Okay.
And Gerard continued to work for them.
Did he not end up owning a spot on?
Gerard did.
Yeah.
Yes, he eventually went to have a spot on and had a couple of them, in fact.
Okay.
And as I understand today, still selling wine around the town.
Yeah, he's got a wine club,
and enjoying himself very much, I believe. Yeah. Yeah.
So your dad bought it from them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I came into the business sometime after that, after I'd finished my national service. Messing around, doing a couple of other things, and I eventually came into the business at about 1980, I think it was.
Oh, that's long ago.
1979,
it really
perhaps.
Dates you.
It does date me. It does date me. At that time, they had an extension to the retail liquor division called Liquor Master, and they were producing a cane spirit, a brandy, a gin, and importing a Scotch whiskey in barrel, which was then broken down to the correct strength and put in bottle here.
Wow.
That was my first job, technically. I used to mix the cane.
The cane mixer.
That was the cane mixer.
The cane mixer at Liquor Masters.
So I broke my teeth in the bottling
I
department.
want to see that on your LinkedIn profile.
It's not there, but perhaps I should put it.
Yeah, there must be a fancy name for that, blender or something.
Well, these days I think they have very fancy names for whatever you want to call it. But technically that was what I did. So I learned how to get it from, let's say, tank to bottle.
Yeah.
And the processes that were involved. I spent some time doing that, and then I went into the distribution side of the business just to understand that for another year or two.
Yeah, at that old Montana store, there was like in the old days there was something in the, wasn't there like a belt or something that you shipped the stuff downstairs, or
yes,
was
there
it somewhere else?
No, there was a belt.
It was quite common. Where else did I see that?
The spirit division and the bottling department and the distribution, etc., for other deliveries was behind the original Montana Cellars.
Okay.
What's now Mr. Price, I believe.
Okay.
And so I spent some time there, then went across to the distribution side. I learned about the distribution.
Was that off on a different site?
It was next door, basically.
Okay, at Mr.
All
Price.
part of the same business.
Okay.
So kind of cut my teeth on those sort of things. And then my next boss was a guy called Phil Ferreira, who.
But your dad owned the business.
He owned the business,
okay.
But Phil Ferreira ran the wholesale division from a sales perspective. And we had a product called Skipper Cane. I don't know if you recall that. It was quite successful at its time because it was priced strategically lower than the opposition. And they had quite a clever slogan which said, "Switch to Skipper and put the change in your pocket." Obviously, clearly a dig at mainstay at the time. So it was a volume thing, obviously, you know, and it had some success. And I think they had a lot of fun with it at the time.
Okay. Do you think there was? Was there in those days? I know there was a lot of shenanigans happening with excise duty and stuff like that. Do you think that sort of stuff happened in those days already?
As far as I recall, I wasn't aware of it, but
okay.
I was fairly sure that there was something going on. Who were the ringleaders or who were most involved at the time, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But there clearly were times when advertised prices were somewhat lower than practically possible, if you put it that way.
Yeah.
So how that all transpired in the wash, I don't really know.
Yeah. But it's always been a problem.
But safe to say it's always been a problem, I think, one way or another.
Yeah,
and I don't know to what extent it is now, probably not the same.
I think a bottle of, any bottle of spirits, the excise is about 60 Rand. And then you've still got to add the value of the product and the bottling process and obviously the packaging.
Exactly.
And I often see product at 70 Rand and there's no ways that is a true reflection of what it should cost.
I don't think so. It can't be.
And when I started my own distribution business and I went to see some guys in Joburg, and he said, don't ever get into the vodka business or the cane business because you can only run a vodka business if you're cheating the tax man. And I also
learned seems
that
to be the case today.
So they did that. And we chatted about the cane. Cane, as I said to you earlier, I met somebody at the Vans Hotel in Camperdown once, I think, Cater Ridge, Umlaas Road, and he mentioned that they used to get a gallon of cane and then they had to water it down. I don't know if he was a worker at a distillery or at a cane farm. I don't know I can't remember. But you said something similar. So you
as far as I'm aware, in the early days, that's how it was delivered. It was delivered in gallon containers or configuration of gallon containers and then watered down on site.
Was it from NCP or were there other suppliers?
I think NCP was the main supplier in those days.
Yeah, probably still is, eh?
Probably still is. So, yeah, obviously the regulations weren't quite as strong and it wasn't as well regulated. But I think that, I don't know. I don't really know how well it was managed or monitored. But I do remember going to outlets like Butterworth Hotel down near central Durban. Tominadu at the time owned that place, and I still remember those big glass containers that sat on the bar, and the cane would literally get tapped off out of those containers into the glasses.
Like a draft.
Almost like a draft beer today.
Yeah.
So what the measure was, I'm not really sure, but it seemed to work at the time. And I think you probably find some of those glass containers are still knocking around in a few places now.
I'll keep my eyes open.
Yeah.
Do you recall the guy that started One Up Liquors?
Frank Jason?
Yes. Because we're sitting here at Glen Orr Centre, and you know that the Jason family owns the centre.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
I remember Frank Jason.
I met him on a plane once. He sat next to me and he said, "Who do you work for?" I said, "I work for One Up Distributors." And he said, "You stole my name." I said, "Yes, I did." And he told me an interesting story, and I must actually find him, and because he owned the Imperial Hotel, didn't he?
That's right, yeah. And they had their own brand, as I remember, One Up as well. Cane and brandy and gin and everything else. I think he was very successful at the time, certainly with the hotels.
Yeah. And he had a plane and he flew around visiting all his franchisees. And how long did your dad still own the Liberty or the Argyle? What was it? Montana Cellars.
Montana Cellars. Yeah, it was then bought by Bacardi Group.
Oh, okay.
And they were investing more into their retail division.
Was that still, who controlled that group then?
Union Wine. Oh. It was part of Union Wine Group.
Okay.
They wanted to expand, as I recall, their retail division, specifically in Natal, because they had almost none.
Yeah.
And that was obviously quite a good acquisition for them. Then sometime later, it was bought by Liberty Liquors.
And that was the Hooper's family, or?
Yeah. Ken Henniker was the...
Oh, yes, I remember his name.
Was the go-to man there, and he did a lot of good things with that business. He really took it to another level. As you know, Ken was a great servant of the industry and a wonderful gentleman.
Yeah.
And he really did a lot for that business. I can't
really remember him.
So, and now it continues to thrive, obviously, still today.
Yeah, now it's part of the Robinson Ultra Group. And for me, interesting is that you guys were the first to import Windhoek beer into Natal.
Well,
or not the first.
After we left the retail side, my dad bought a wholesale license called Team Liquor World.
Oh.
And so he started that, and then I joined him about a year later. We had a small but interesting range of local estate wines that we were selling.
Okay.
And soon after that...
Did you buy the whole portfolio, or was it just a license?
No, we just bought the license.
Okay.
And then we went looking for some agencies. So we started in the wine sector. We went down to the Cape and we met with a few friends and spoke to a few people who we knew were interested, and we put together a small portfolio of wines, and that's where we felt we wanted to concentrate. Soon after that, we met and developed some form of a local distribution partnership with Boschendal Wines. That was just when they were starting to become successful. And Vergelegen was a natural extension of that business for them. So we had a little bit of help, from the big guy to get us going a bit. and we did that business, got that business going for a while, 5 or 6 years of good wine distribution. So we had a bit of a platform, albeit a small one, in the retail side in terms of our distribution. Then, almost by chance, we met a character by the name of Gaspard Bossett from Namibia Breweries. And after a couple of meetings, we chatted about the possibility of us distributing some beer for them. They really weren't represented in Natal. They had a footprint in the Cape, and they had one in the Transvaal.
And that was it with Manfred and Manfred Huff?
Yeah. And in the Cape, I think they had I think it was Greg Holtman who was already in situ in terms of doing some distribution for them.
Okay, but wasn't he working for them?
He was working for them at the time. Yeah. They wanted to expand their business in the country and move from just being sort of available through a local distributor into having a full platform so that they could launch their brand properly in the South African market. They saw the opportunity, and it was obviously a good opportunity because their brands represented something slightly different to what was on offer.
Yeah, so they owned their own distribution in Joburg and Cape Town, but left you to do KZN.
Yes. Yes. In time, Cape Town was also given to Greg Holtman, and he took ownership of the distribution there, as we did here.
Okay.
Joburg became a very big market quite quickly, so they were a little bit more progressive there, and they built their own warehouse, they developed their own infrastructure within the brewery.
It was massive in Joburg.
It was massive, yeah.
There was a guy
called
George. Can you remember George?
The growth was huge.
No. I'm trying to think who the people were in Joburg.
Well, they eventually had a guy called Dimitri.
Dimitri, not George.
Dimitri the Greek.
Yes, that's the one.
Anybody who lives in Joburg will remember Dimitri. And he was quite special at the time because he was just the kind of guy they needed. I think he'd come out of the Gilbey's stable, and
he was well connected.
He was well connected and well liked, and they put together a really big, hard-working team who did well to get a footprint very quickly in that market. Durban obviously was a much smaller market, and strategically it wasn't as important for Namibia Breweries at the time because they knew that once Cape Town and Johannesburg were really up to speed, then Durban would be a natural extension. And as we know, sometimes Durban can be a little lagging in terms of getting the traction going.
So when did you start doing?
So that was 1993.
Okay, so it wasn't long before we started with Bavaria.
No, it wasn't. It was more or less the same time.
Because I started in '94.
And I think that's indicative of the market at the time. You know, that there was scope for other brands. People were starting to look around. Namibia Breweries had this slogan with the Windhoek beer that it was only made with natural products and
pure beer.
We sold it on the basis that you weren't going to get a hangover.
And then the whole chemical thing started.
Yeah, it wasn't a nice thing to say, but I mean, people used to talk about it. Oh, there's no chemicals in this beer.
Yeah.
Well, no, there wasn't, but it's always what suits you and what you like to drink.
Course.
But I think we did play with that a bit, and we used it to our advantage, and it developed very nicely. It was really small in the beginning. The beer wasn't great, to be honest. It was quite heavy and dark and high alcohol at the time. They were trying to promote right in the beginning a brand called Export.
Yes.
Windhoek Export.
Wasn't in a blue can?
It was in a blue can, yeah. But very heavy beer, hard to drink, especially in the Durban humidity. But very soon after that, they switched back to the Windhoek lager, recognizing that was the one that they wanted to do the work with.
Okay. And Tafel never did anything.
Tafel only later was launched because they specifically wanted it to be Windhoek, and then Windhoek Light, because at that time, if you remember, it was when the whole drink and driving thing became a problem, and it was seen as a good alternative.
Yeah. I'm certainly glad that I didn't know your background, because it might have intimidated me. When we started Bavaria, I thought Peter and his crony Alan were the opposition. If I'd known you got 3 generations of legacy and stuff to stand on.
Well, we were still the small guys, Holger, at the time. Eh?
You were.
We were trying hard, but we were still the small guys. We still had to try and hide from the SAB reps, because they'd still have a go at us whenever they could. But yeah, it was interesting, and it was great fun.
Yeah.
At the time, we were young, and we had a young, exciting group of guys who were with us, enjoying the success, and it was really good. Yeah. We then purchased a warehouse, and
you worked out of Tollgate area there.
Tollgate initially, which was not much more than a hole in the wall originally.
Can you recall how many cases you would have moved in a month
of beer?
Yeah.
Well,
any numbers stuck in your memory?
Well, our contract required us to buy a truck on the first order, which was 34 pallets. Yeah. And by the second month, we still had half the stock, and we weren't quite sure if we'd made a mistake. So we were getting orders for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5 cases at best. And then one day we got a breakthrough. We had a listing with Macro, and Macro Springfield bought half a pallet, and we thought,
half a pallet.
That's wonderful. But to be honest, it moved quite quickly from there.
Okay.
I think we were getting support from the brewery, so they were helping with advertising spend, and the bigger outlets like Macro, etc., were supporting it. Yeah. And it started quite quickly. We moved to a bigger premises in Pinetown with about 2,500 square meters, so we had enough capacity there.
Is that the one where you ended up buying?
Yes. Okay. In Pinetown.
Yeah. Off Richmond Road.
That's right. Yeah. And that was great, because suddenly we had a home, we had space, and we had a presence, not just in the market, but for people to see. People would come and see that things were going on there. Things were happening. Look, we were very aware of Bavaria, and it was there, but we never saw Bavaria as our main opposition. It was, in essence, almost an ally, because it was what we were trying to do to extend the option available to the public. And let's be honest, it was South African breweries that we were trying to get market share from. But I remember those days with Bavaria fondly. I think I made a few visits to your premises and had a look, see what was going on.
Yeah, it's a pity that one couldn't team up. I mean, obviously in hindsight, but it would have been a nice force if we could have teamed up.
I think that Namibia breweries, with their objective, they wouldn't have wanted to do that.
No, of course
because they wanted to be specific. And look, it worked. I think they did well. The brand continued to grow, and it's still a good brand today.
It is.
You asked about Tafel. Tafel wasn't really in the mix in those days, and it was only after a year or two, once we'd made a couple of visits up to the brewery, that we could see a little bit more about what was happening there, that we realized all the Namibians were drinking Tafel. And we kept saying to them, well, let's get Tafel down in South Africa. It tasted really, really good. And as I recall, the Tafel was originally made in the small brewery at Swakopmund.
Which they had acquired.
I think from the Hansa days.
Yeah, so I think...
And they had a really good brewmaster there, Christian, somebody his name was, I don't remember his surname now. And he was really good. And they were producing brilliant brews out of that little brewery. Yeah. And I think they made all the draft beer was made from that brewery as well.
And Oerbach.
Yeah.
And the son of the owner of the Swakop brewery lives in
Hillcrest. Does he?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's introduced himself to me once or twice. I see him around
name?
Hillcrest Tops. I can't remember his
Okay.
name. Yeah. He lives around. He does some work at Hillcrest Tops. Don't know what.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I would like to meet him. Chat about some of those days.
Yeah. So I've tried to get to ask Manfred Huff, but I mean he obviously mentioned some names, but I can't recall. And when did then you also did Beck's, eh? Or was it much later?
It was a bit later. We started. I think next came Holsten.
Okay.
Holsten was a really nice brand, out of Germany, from Bremen.
Yeah, with Klaus von Müller.
It was Klaus von Müller. Oh, wonderful man that is.
Yeah.
And he worked very hard in the South African market. They started brewing Holsten in Namibia under license, and it was a good brew. And I think it had a lot of success in Gauteng and probably the Cape.
Especially
Not so much, I think because of the taste profile. It was quite a bitter beer. And to our mind, not quite as suitable for the humid Durban market. But it nevertheless was a super brand. Then later came Beck's as well.
Yeah, and then Holsten moved over to Bavaria, I think.
That's right.
That's where I met Klaus von Müller.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, and Beck's was then still a family business, or?
Beck's was still a family business. I remember going to visit the brewery, and
in Bremen.
Yeah. It was Beck's was an interesting exercise. Again, similar to Holsten, it was had quite a high bitter content.
Typical northern
the taste
German
profile
Pilsner,
was typical northern German Pilsner, as you say, and delicious drinking, but not what we would call a sessionable beer here.
Yeah.
So again, with limited success, certainly in this market.
Yeah. And I was talking to somebody about Beck's, and he can't remember. And the Prince from Bavaria. He said Beck's was always the international traveller, the German traveller, businessman. Anywhere you went in the world, he demanded Beck's. And now it's nowhere to be found. I mean,
is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
I'm
not
surprised.
in the South African market. There's only the alcohol-free available. And it's obviously owned by AB InBev now.
Yeah.
I worked in Bremen for about a year, and so I've got fond memories of drinking Beck's. We even had it on tap an hour in
your apartment.
In the office, in the bar. Okay.
Yeah, nice brand.
And can you remember launching the Hofbrau? What was that saga all about?
Yeah.
Somebody.
There were two different brands. There were two different launches. The one was a Hofbrau,
and there was a Das Pilsner.
And there was a Das Pilsner. I can't recall at this stage which came first, but I suspect it was Das Pilsner that came first.
And that was a Namibian fabrication, the brand.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
We had asked the brewery to look at doing a lighter, sessionable, easy drinking beer, about 4% alcohol, which I think it was, in the Pilsner style, because they didn't really have one in the Pilsner style. And that was the result. And instantly found quite a bit of success, but didn't last.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I quite liked the brand, and I had my fair share of it, but for whatever reason, it didn't last. And I don't think they were too concerned about it, because although they were looking for an extension to the existing range, they did want to make sure that Windhoek Lager was their first choice for the consumer.
And were you still doing the other export, and what other
export was there as well? Nothing really came of that. Special, I think, went back to Namibia as a Namibian brand only.
Okay.
And Urbach was their seasonal winter or hunting beer, they used to call it. Also a delicious beer, amazing beer. Yeah. But you can't drink too many of them.
No.
Not at the high alcohols.
Half a bottle.
Yeah, half a bottle was good. Then, as you said, Hofbrau, they launched as well. I think the option there was to try and have a brand that was cheaper than the Windhoek pricing point, and perhaps get a little bit closer to the SAB pricing and try to swing people on price a bit more. It's quite a nice tasting beer.
And the idea behind Hofbrau, I mean, for us, Hofbrau means the Hofbrau house in Munich, but it's got nothing to do with that. Hofbrau is just anybody can use that name. I don't think it's a trademarked word.
Yeah, I don't know what the marketing specialists were thinking at the time, but I imagine that they were thinking Hofbrau is synonymous with volume beer at a good price, and perhaps that's what they were hoping to achieve.
Because SAB
they
also
didn't get
launched...
much success with the brand.
Not at all, okay. Because SAB also launched a Hofbrau at the same time.
That's right, yeah.
Which was, I mean, wasn't it about exactly the same time?
I think it was the same time.
So there must have been some spying going on one of the sides.
No doubt. No doubt.
And then sometime the Amstel thing happened, hey? What was that again?
Well, that was the whole amalgamation with Diageo and Heineken.
Wasn't it before that already?
Are you talking about the Amstel? Heineken. Where
Heineken decided not to renew the agreement with SAB or something.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, sorry. Correct. They decided not to renew the agreement, and they went to Liberty Brews to see if they would brew for them.
Okay.
Or sell under license or whatever it was.
Yeah. And Heineken wasn't really that big then, eh?
It wasn't big, and I think the Namibians felt that it was counterproductive to their own brands in many ways, certainly from a sales perspective. And bear in mind they'd also had a go at Guinness too for a while. They'd brewed Guinness under license in Namibia.
Okay.
Specifically on draft, I think. And also with limited success both here and even less success in Namibia.
I can imagine.
So, from there Heineken, I guess, became part of the Diageo fold, as it turns out, from thereafter. Is that the way you call it?
It took a while, I think, until the whole brand house joint venture happened, but But somehow you ended up doing Amstel.
No, not Amstel.
Didn't you do Amstel?
No, not Amstel.
Oh.
Amstel was never for us.
Oh, okay. I somehow thought
there was talk about it happening.
Okay.
But obviously, Heineken must have been in some sort of discussion with Diageo at that point. And I guess it was all put on hold for a while.
Okay, and then they did that joint venture to form Brand House, and that's kind of where you lost Windhoek.
Yeah, that's when our contracts came to an end.
Yeah,
and we kind of went our own ways after that.
Okay, and you'd build quite a nice business up to then, and then you lose the big Windhoek portfolio, and then you got to regroup, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's how it goes. Eh? When you don't own the brand, you expect that those sort of things happen. But to be fair, Liberty Breweries, right to the last day, as always, were absolute gentlemen.
Okay.
And they went out of their way to make it comfortable for us, and they were very good about doing the right thing.
They should have just given you tafel and said, run with that one.
Well, wouldn't that have been nice? Might still be doing that too.
Yeah.
So they all went their separate ways, and so did we. So we diversified back into whatever we could pick up at the time. When I say we, because at that stage Hilton had joined me, and then took a share in the business with me. My dad had since recently retired. This was early 2000s.
Okay.
So he, he joined the business at that time, and we kind of went back to the drawing board and said, okay, well, we need to get this thing going again. So we started looking at more wine principals, and we got distribution from other principals who were looking for mostly smaller distributors who were looking for a footprint in KZN that we could provide. And we started talking to a couple of other principals and a few beer people. And that led us into our next venture, which was NMK Schultz.
Okay. And yeah, that was quite a nice business. I mean, I had, at one stage we were doing a bit of distribution for NMK Schultz in Durban through the Bavaria network. And I must give Rod Simmons a lot of credit. He taught me a lot of things about, I want to call them cult brands that NMK were doing. I mean, these magnificent European brands,
Brilliant.
liqueurs and beers. And
Beers
Rod's
too.
passion was always, I mean, it was infectious. I mean, maybe sometimes too much energy and too much push, but I certainly learned a lot from him. And the NMK business, I believe Mr. Schultz is still, he lives in Hout Bay, he's obviously also getting on, but I think the story was that his son passed away in a car accident.
I heard something about that,
And then I think he lost interest in the business and wanted to sell it.
Yeah.
And that's where you guys picked up the business.
That's where we picked it up. Yeah, it was pretty much the four guys that were sort of thrown under the bus after the Namibia Breweries final episode, and with Greg Holtman from Cape Town and Andre Homan in Johannesburg and Rod Bender.
I don't remember Rod. Rob, hey.
Rob, yeah, he was a great financial guy.
Okay. And Andre was from Coca-Cola or what?
Originally Coca-Cola, but I think he'd spent some time at SAB too. And then he headed up the Namibia Breweries operation in South Africa.
That,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and the NMK Schultz story didn't go that well, I think. Eh?
Not in the final analysis, no.
Yeah.
I think there were some differences there, and there were some peculiarities in the business. When we first came to it was mostly wine, spirits, and a little bit of specialist beer.
Yeah.
They were great beer, but not big volumes.
Yeah.
No major brands that were going to sell any volumes. And I think there was some differences of opinion. The sales team were quite highly focused on the wine portfolio. Certainly the sales managers. And I think the idea was to try and turn it into a beer company in the long run. So there was a little bit of conflict, if you want to call it that, internally, and probably never really found its rhythm. We became quite involved with the Stella brand at that point.
Stella.
Yeah.
And then that's when the whole...
And that was quite... Yeah, there was quite a lot of opportunity. We got a lot of support from the Stella brand, and the objective was to try and make it into a much bigger brand in this country, with a view to local brewing at some point.
Because we did some local brewing at Bavaria Bra. We made draft, I think.
Yeah.
And was that about the time when the whole NBEF consolidation in Europe happened, or was Stella still a small business?
I think it was soon after that that NBEF became...
Where all the Newcastle Brown Ales and all that stuff
all
disappeared.
the mixing up of brands. It was about 10 years ago, if I recall.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Okay.
So, yeah, we got involved, rightly or wrongly, with KWB at the time, and that didn't work out in the wash. But, yeah, we moved on again, and we went back to what we started with in the beginning, which was the Team Liquor World brand, and it diversified into a business called Beverage Emporium. And we hooked up with guys from Joburg and Cape Town that we knew, and tried to get some brands that we could sell on a national footprint, but with independent ownership in each of the different regions.
Yeah.
And I still think that there's a really good opportunity for those kind of operations. As I've watched it over the years, I've seen how the smaller guys that get swallowed up by the bigger guys by virtue of the fact that they lose brands all the time.
Yeah.
And you talked about it earlier, how there's scope for smaller, more specific, customer-focused businesses that will deliver your brand quickly to customers' door and efficiently for bigger volumes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with something that I'm thinking of now, I mean, the whole birth of the redistributor. I mean, when did that start? The first one was, I think, Marriott Gardens. Remember?
Could have been Marriott Gardens, yeah.
Remember they used to start. They started their business delivering to the King's Park boxes and tents afterwards, and they grew into a redistributor. And I think that, in my memory, was kind of one of the first redistribution businesses. And then came Siggy from Fast Track, and I mean that kind of business is massive now. There's every town has got a redistributor, and where you can do one-stop shopping, and I mean that didn't exist.
No, it didn't.
In the early days,
we were quite nervous of those guys because although they were buying product from us, we saw them as a threat because essentially they were going to do what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we never really understood. Well, certainly in the beginning, we didn't quite understand how to tackle it.
Yeah.
Understanding that the big guys were supporting them heavily because it was another distribution alternative or option for them.
Yeah.
And the whole rebate thing, I think, became quite a big deal. And obviously for us smaller guys, we couldn't afford to give those kind of rebates, so we were left out of it. And we had to try and work around it. So as much as we could, we wanted them to help us because we knew that was an alternative getting product to the customer. But it was an expensive one for smaller businesses like ours.
Yeah, where you got fixed margins. Yeah.
Now, of course, those redistributors are playing a large part in the market all over the country.
Massive, and I think it's all thanks to the brand house guys. I think they birthed these monsters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you finally sold your shares to Hilton and his partners, and now you're done with the business.
Yeah, that was almost 2 years ago.
Really?
And, at the time, I decided I was going to take a 6 months break.
Yeah.
And see what comes up in the meantime. And I'm now a little bit further into my sabbatical in 6 months. But I have been doing a little bit of work with a couple of mates of mine in the industry. I chat to Hilton a lot, and I'm up to date with what he's doing, and they've got a good recipe there, which will be great for them in a longer-term perspective. And a couple of my other mates I've been talking to about some projects that we're busy with, but at this stage, nothing specific.
Yeah.
So I try to keep my ear close to the ground as much as I can. After 35 years or whatever it is, it's hard not to.
Yeah, not to be involved.
It's hard not to wander into your local retail store and look at prices and what the offering is. So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, good.
What about you? Do you find yourself going back into that sort of
the
distribution profile?
No. It's not my core strength. Controlling is not what I do, and collecting money and controlling staff and stock. Yeah, it's a tough business now, and it certainly has changed a lot. Look, the business, I think the biggest change for what I've seen is social media. I mean, people that I interview now start a business and they can launch a brand on social media, and they've never been to Joburg, but they get orders from Joburg. One of the guys that I interviewed last week, Rob Haynes, who started a company called League Beers, has just done a crowdfunding for a new gin. He raised over R1 million on crowdfunding, and overnight. I mean, not overnight. He's obviously done a lot of work and stuff, but I mean, those opportunities exist now. They didn't exist 5 years ago. So
social media is amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing.
It's incredible what you can do with it.
Yeah.
And specifically with those kind of activities.
Yeah.
If I just think of what's happening now in the gin market, and you're very close to that yourself, I know specifically around the around craft gin, etc. You see all of it on social media.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The events, the brands, the profiles, the people, it's all on social media.
Yeah, and I think the consumer is so sensitive to, or they can pick up if it's fake, if it's a corporate behind it, and I think it's a big threat for the big brands and the big corporates.
Yeah.
I mean, if a big company buys a small craft brewery or distillery, I think it can be, it can be a nail in the coffin.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's brilliant. And I love social media, and it's amazing what it's doing the world over.
Yeah, and I think it's a massive opportunity for the small guys to really make a difference, like we've done at Hillcrest Tops, for example, where we've just really created that whole destination on social media.
Yeah.
And again, that wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah, but of course, you also have to be committed to it. You know, it takes a lot of investment and a lot of time and organization to bring those brands into an outlet like that and have them available.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. It was really very good catching up with you, and I look forward to some more stories, and maybe you can introduce me to a few of the old timers that have got a story or two to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great chatting, and for me to reminisce a bit, because it goes back a while, and how the markets have changed and the business has changed and the brands have changed. It's been quite an evolution, really.
Yeah.
So it's been great chatting. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks.
And wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.